Hello everyone, thank you for giving me the opportunity to be here. My name is Nguyễn Như Ngân. I am a student from Vietnam National University, Hanoi. I am going to present my research about commodity future for coffee in Vietnam. And coffee is one of the most produced products in Vietnam, second only to rice. But the problem is agricultural prices are low when crops have a good harvest and vice versa. Vietnamese farmers face uncertainty about the number of products and the price which they will sell. Predicting price is very difficult, and it is necessary to establish and develop the derivative market in Vietnam to help the price rate of coffee. And since 2000, in order to orient the economy to the market, the government of Vietnam has committed to innovating market through developing commodity exchange and example such as Buôn Ma Thuột Coffee Exchange Center (BECE) and Vietnam Commodity Exchange (VNX). However, trading results are very low liquidity on value and volume. After a few years later, uh, both the market had to close, and on August 2018, MXV official launched the national centralized commodity market, bringing opportunities for hedging and Vietnamese participants can hedging through trading on ICE Europe and ICE US. And the above practice provide us with a high motivation to examine if coffee future trading on international commodity exchange totally complete a mission of hedging for the domestic spot price market. And in case coffee future in IC Europe and IC US are very useful financial instruments of risk management for Vietnamese participants. Optimal hedging ratio and optimal number of contracts will be determined. Uh, in line of this objective, this research applies vector error correction model (VECM) to investigate if long-run relationship between future price and domestic price exist and weight future as a best hedging tool for Vietnamese participants. Besides that, we had an in-depth interview with experts about the feasibility of introducing coffee future into the domestic commodity exchange. In Vietnam, we have not found any study using quantitative method to examine the role of commodity futures. After referring to many other studies, we decided to use the vector error correction model (VECM) to investigate the long-run relationship. We use secondary data, include spot price and future price of Robusta and Arabica future. In terms of primary data, the research collects them through in-depth interviews with experts about the feasibility of introducing coffee future into the domestic commodity exchange. And we divide criteria into four groups, such as volatility, liquidity, homogeneity, and objective factor. Questionnaires are developed on Likert scale from 1 to 5. So VECM model is a specific case of VAR model in case the variable have co-integration relationship between each other. VECM has good interpretation with long-term and short-term equation. Optimal hedge ratio and optimal number of contracts. We use S according to John Hunt. Uh, the results show that the ETC coefficient of contract expiring in January, March, and May is from -1 to 0, which means that Robusta future expiration of January, March, and May can serve as tool of hedging price risk for Robusta in Vietnam. but in July, September, and November are not. In terms of Arabica, we don't found any relationship between Arabica spot price and future price on ICUS. In-depth interview indicates that it is not feasible to launch coffee future in Vietnam in short term. It is very necessary to seriously think about hedging for Vietnam farmers on coffee. Until now, they still struggle to yield derivative instruments on both domestic and foreign markets. In long term, on the basis of consideration of convenience and accessibility, Vietnam should build our own domestic commodity chain, like what African and American countries did, and our results indicate that both Robusta and Arabica future have not totally been able to hedge fluctuation in coffee price on domestic market in Vietnam, and the optimal hedging ratio are approximately 39% for Robusta future, which are much less than results computed by previous research over the world. So this empirical evidence does not support theory about the role of derivative instruments generally and hedging role of future in particular. And in the uh, in addition, Vietnam coffee is always ranked at a very high position in the world in terms of export value. So developing domestic commodity exchange will be an indispensable change in Vietnam. In conclusion, the introduction of MXV remarks the appearance of the national centralized commodity market in Vietnam, and our study provides a first empirical evidence about the hedging role of coffee future contract by using vector algorithm model. Uh, the research demonstrates that there is only a long-run relationship between spot price and future price in January, March, and May on IC Europe for Robusta, and there need further follow-up study of coffee future contract, and especially about the feasibility of developing future trading for coffee on the domestic market. Thank you for listening.